All right, well, welcome everyone. I am happy to be here this afternoon with Dinty Moore, the author of Between Panic and Desire, one of my favorite and most fun to read memoirs that I've ever read, published by University of Nebraska Press. He's the author of many, many other things as well. Um, and of course, very, very much a part of Brevity, the Journal of Concise Literary Nonfiction. So we have a real expert here with us today. And thank you, Dinty, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So we've communicated a little bit by email, and you know that my students in Airstream Dispatches have been enjoying your book all month, and they have lots of questions for you, but I'm going to sneak one in first. It's a question that I like to ask every writer, and especially a writer like you who's familiar with flash form, and that is that I'd love it if you'd share a tiny moment from your life with us, something that has stayed lodged in your memory where you have a distinct feeling of, your worldview before and your worldview after. So it might be something from childhood or something that changed your life as a writer, but what stands out as something that was just really impressionable?
I mean, as a writer, I guess there's two answers. One is as a person, the other one is as a writer. As a writer, it's the first real writing class I took. But I took some journalism classes in college, but they were just like how to cover the city council meeting, just the facts. But the first creative writing class I took at Temple University, I was already 28 or 29 years old. And it was the professor, David Bradley, let me into the class because I wasn't an enrolled student, under the agreement that I would bring my manuscript the very first night. So I did. The first night, the first time he just passed it around. He read through the syllabus and passed it out. So now we're at the next week, the very first real meeting of the class, and he comes in and stands at the front of the table. There's a very large, impressive man, a weightlifter. He stands at the front of the table, and he's got my story there. Very first time I've ever been in a writing workshop. It was a graduate workshop because I was 28 years old, but it was my first. And this story that I worked on and was very precious about, and he slams it on the table and looks at the class and says, "Okay, who liked this shit?"
Oh.
And the whole class just went like. And maybe because I was older, maybe just because of who I am. This is a cliche to say, but I had a rough upbringing, so I had some pretty thick skin at that time. What went through my mind is, "Oh my God, that's cool." And then he spent an hour and a half meticulously but lovingly going through this story sentence by sentence and illustrating everything I had done wrong. And I learned more in that hour and a half. Well, I don't know if I might have learned more in an hour and a half that I've ever learned since, but it certainly was like, I went from not understanding, I thought writing was all about ideas and self-expression. And by the end of that class, I realized writing was all about sentences and clarity and taking the reader and holding the reader in place while they listened.
Mm-hmm.
And and I walked away saying, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. I want to do what he did. And that happened eventually.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's so great. Thank you. Did you have another one you said from not as?
No, I don't know.
Read the book, right? They're in here.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, meeting my wife, having our daughter.
Yeah.
Those are cliches, but those are life-changing events.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. All right. Well, the first question from an Airstream Dispatches student is, I will just go ahead and quote it directly. He's actually, one of his jobs is as a researcher and interviewer himself. So he's great at posing questions. And he asked, Latricia Nixon as generational psychologist was absolutely brilliant.
Oh,
was this a preconceived notion, or did you wander into it as you were writing this book? Either way, as writers, what is the best way to be open to and nurture great out-of-the-blue ideas?
That's a smart question, and he kind of answered it along the way. The second part of the question answers the first part. That may have been the last chapter I wrote, even though it occurs, I think, in the middle of the book. It's very short and a chapter that's very different than the other ones because it's fantasy.
Yeah.
It was like one of those crazy idea moments. Like, there's something I need to get across in the book. Am I making the emotional and the intellectual and the comic, because it's, the Richard Nixon part is part real and part comic. Am I making that river flow through the book well enough? And I need something. I need something in the middle. And then it's like, it occurred to me, oh, I know I could do. And then, the first thought in my mind was, it's a stupid idea. And the second thought in my mind was, oh, people would just mock you if you did that. And the third thought is like, nobody would take that seriously. And one of the things an artist has to learn to do is like not listen to those voices. I mean, sometimes, but you listen to them, but don't let them shut you down. So, I wrote it down, and the next day I looked at it and said, boy, that is a dumb idea. Let me try it. And, I played around with it a bit. I ended up going online to research scripts of online mind readers. Not mind readers, not the right term, excuse me. Psychics. So I could sort of adapt that form, and I knew a lot about Tricia Nixon. She was the daughter of President Nixon, for those who are not my age. And eventually I put it together and said, yeah, that really was a dumb idea, but it kind of works.
Yeah.
It's a book where I'm having fun, and I'm certainly having fun there. So I believe you always have to listen to crazy ideas, because even if they're bad, they might lead you to the next idea. That's what, that's how brainstorming works. But certainly if you're doing something playful in your work, you need to think like a kid. And, like a kid is playing in the sandbox with his buckets, and then he doesn't stop and think, that's a really dumb way to make a castle. He just like makes his castle. And if it's, this would be fun to do that. So writing is a combination of both the playfulness, and eventually the serious writer comes in and says, I better edit this. You have to have that playful alive as well.
Yeah. The memoir really, I mean, even when the content is heavy, I laughed more reading this book and was sort of astonished, like, oh wait, you can do that? Yeah, you can do it. He's doing it.
Thank you.
So,
a compliment.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I share it as much as I can, because it's amazing, isn't it? How many ideas we already have. We just glean consciously or subconsciously about what you can't do, what's like not allowed.
And the tragedy is, as we get older, there's more of them.
Oh boy.
Whereas I think the happy life is is when you get older and there's less of them, you shed them.
Yes.
I spent some time with some Tibetan monks this weekend, actually, so I think that's influencing me. I'm giving a little bit of
get it while you can. That's awesome. All right. Well, another question. This is from one of my monthly mentorship writers. So writers that I work with really deeply for 6 or 7 months of the year on longer manuscripts. And she is actually putting together a collection of her own right now. So she's got a lot of the big picture questions going on. She would like to know, can you give us a sense of what the first draft of your book looked like, and how many rewrites the manuscript went through? Sub-question, how did you know when to stop revising, or when you'd fallen into the perfect experimental form for that chapter and, okay, don't mess it up now?
Yeah. So the first draft of the book, or the first finished draft of the book, I'm not sure which she's asking about. I worked on the book I had a couple of essays that had actually been published. Son of Mr. Green Jeans, for instance. And I was looking at them and saying, there's some common threads here. I wonder if there's a way to combine these and turn it into something larger. So I put those together and stared at them and moved them around. And then I wrote a couple of new essays and maybe took a couple of other already essays in progress and tried to reshape them to form something. And then I said, okay, this is the book. It starts here and has these chapters and and I worked on that for, off and on for a year and a half, 2 years, even though some of the material already existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, if you ask me about an individual essay, I'd probably say I do 40 to 50 drafts.
Yeah.
In a book, it's hard to say because you're working really heavily on this little section and not so much on that section. But I'm a bear when it comes to revision.
Okay.
So I send the book. I say this book is done, and I send it off to University of Nebraska Press, and because they're an academic press, they send it out to some outside readers to say what's working here and what's not working here. And one of the readers said, great book, love it, publish it right away. And the other outside reader, I found out later who she is, just kicked my ass. Just like part of this part of this book is good, but this chapter is false, and he's just trying to shoehorn this chapter in because he wants it to fit, but it doesn't. And he raises all these questions in the first half and then leaves them hanging and doesn't answer. Just a 4-page sort of like take your soul, rip it out. I have a theme here because just like that David Bradley story where he said, who liked this shit? I read that and I felt horrible for about 24 hours. But then I realized, she's right. I didn't know it was a she at the point, but at that point, this person is right. It's like your best friend sits you down and says, Katey, let me tell you what your flaws are. You don't want your best friend to do that, but your best friend knows you pretty well and and can read you and can see this person. I won't name her, though I thanked her eventually. She really got the book, and where I was hitting a false note, she saw it, and where something was missing, she saw it. So I worked on it for another 14 months. I threw half of the chapters out entirely, so only half of the book survived, and I wrote all new material, and that's the book that finally, that showed up in the bookstores.
Yeah.
Again, that one. So when I figured out who it was, and I told her what happened, she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I did." And I'm like, "No, thank you. I think it took 3 years before she believed me that I was grateful."
Oh, wow. Well, that's still a pretty quick turnaround to generate half a book's worth of new content. And
yeah, I was on fire. It was a wonderful feeling because what she helped me do was realize what the book was really about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by that I mean both emotionally and in terms of the the emotional river of it and the mysterious questions it was pursuing. So whereas at the beginning of a project I'm just like a turtle trying to learn how to type, by that point, and she gave me the fire under my haunches that I needed. I was on fire, and I really worked hard. Because I wanted to, and because it felt like this expression, I'm in my power.
Yeah.
It felt like I was like in a good writing zone because I knew where I wanted to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I had that all the time, and please believe me, I don't.
It's so hard in your own work. I mean, I write in both genres, but I primarily publish in fiction. And I think that one of the main reasons is because that critical distance in nonfiction, I find it to be even more challenging.
I think there was more to her question, but
yeah, no, how did you know when to stop?
How do I know? Yeah, it's every writer has trouble answering this, to me, and now I'm just going to talk about like an individual chapter or an individual essay because a book is too big to. When I've drafted something to the point that I think, this essay is ready to go. It starts in the right place, ends in the right place, covers the right territory. It's interesting. I read it out loud to myself, and seldom can I on the first go through, but if I can read it all the way through and my tongue or brain doesn't stop anywhere, then it's done. But usually I read it all the way through out loud. That's important because the ear is doing the work. Usually when I think it's finished, I read it out loud and I realize, oh, wait a minute, this thing on page 3, my tongue can't even say it, so how can it be a decent sentence? Or even this thing on page 5, that's a really lovely sentence, but it doesn't say anything.
Mm.
Or the sentiment on page 7 that you spent time on, it just sounds so true, but you know what, Dinty, you're lying.
Mm.
I mean, I encounter the work differently orally through the ear than I do when I'm just staring at my word processor. So and then I go through and fix those things, and then when I can read it all the way through and go, and even though you don't want the reader to notice, it's not like poetry, and certainly you don't want it to be sing-songy, but prose should have some music and a rhythm that moves the story forward, so you pick up on that too. Yeah. So when I can read it all the way through and nothing in my brain says, oh, stop, that's not working, then I say, yeah, I guess it's done.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so speaking of narrowing it down to a specific chapter, a lot of us really fell immediately in love with the number 9 chapter. And one participant in particular asked what went into this chapter, how much of it was pre-learned knowledge and how much was trying to find those connections.
So the chapter is about the Beatles, the White Album, and the song on the White Album called Number 9. And I knew almost nothing. I had the memory of, Paul is dead, the time in my youth when everybody thought the Beatles were sending us secret messages through their music, and if you played it backwards, you could hear the message. I kind of knew that. And somewhere I think I ran across a little tidbit that suggested that Charles Manson, the serial killer, was also a Beatles fan and thought he was getting messages. And I think those are the 2 pieces I had. Mm-hmm. My own memories, which I start with, like me as a kid, listening to the radio, getting freaked out. And I had the Manson part of it. And the rest of it, the handlers and how they connect, and all the weird coincidences about the number 9 in John Lennon's life, and Chapman and Hinckley and Manson, and all the number 9 and the number 11 is just full of coincidences. All of that I didn't know till I did my research. The material about Yoko Ono, which I thought was hilarious. I don't know. I was just like laughing out loud when I was doing my research. All of that was like I went down a rabbit hole, and the further I went, just kept finding stuff.
Yeah.
And not that the essay wrote itself, but the material in the essay just kept suggesting itself.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to extend that a little further, because I assign your chapter writing for discovery from Truth of the Matter often. And it's also something that I am personally intimidated by too, as a writer writing for discovery. And I'm not intimidated necessarily because I don't want to like waste my time. Like I'm of the school of thought that no writing is wasted writing, or you'll eventually get where you need to get. But
you want to publish before you die.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But it can feel so hard, especially in nonfiction, or maybe even some in the novel, to feel like you're forcing a connection, to like fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And then to believe in it and have the whole rest of the story or the whole rest of the essay is like hinging on this connection, and you're not even sure if it's the real deal. I mean, what would you help us? Help those of us who flounder in that area.
There's a lot of stuff I threw out of that essay. It's like you're fitting things in, and I would live with them for 3 or 4 days, or sometimes 3 or 4 weeks. And this is specifically number 9, but every other essay I've ever written. You live with them for 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 weeks. You try to fit them in the material, and you can finally say, that ain't fitting. And you do that difficult process of saying, I spent 4 hours writing this scene, and guess what? It's coming out. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the end, that short answer is trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm trying to come up with a clever answer, and I don't have one right away.
Well, I heard you mention the
how do you know what it is working? I guess that's where your gut has to come in. That's why you read, and that's why you study other artists and other art forms. It's like you form an aesthetic and a gut, and at a certain point, you have to make the decision. Is this an artificial splice? Is the writer, in this case it's you, is the writer trying to force this material together when it doesn't? And then you have to make that decision. I think your instincts get better at that over time. Well, I think I'll leave it at that. But
that's helpful. That's helpful.
That's a problem everybody has, and though and I guess I would just add. So you take a piece of something and you say, this is going to fit into this essay, and you try it and you give it 3 days and you write a bunch of sentences around it and you say, no, that didn't work, and you throw it out. That's not really failure, because A, you learned something, and B, one of these days you're going to do that, and it's going to be like the magic moment in the essay. Mm-hmm. So you have to, and then from that, and then the essay grows from that into something beautiful. Mm-hmm. So you have to make those attempts, those grafts, and some of them are going to fail, but the real failure is not trying.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay. Last question from a participant, and then one more from me. And I'm sure you get this a lot, because your memoir is funny. It's fun to read. I sure hope it was fun to write. It sounds like it was. You've said certain.
Some days I hate, you're a writer, some days I hated myself and wanted to toss my laptop across the room, and some days I was like, this is actually fun, I'm amusing myself. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so tips for writing humor, and especially if humor isn't something that comes to a person naturally.
Yeah, that's a tough answer, but if humor isn't something that comes to you naturally, maybe you shouldn't be writing humor. It's really hard to force it and fake it. You can develop it. You can, read humor and listen to stand-up comics and think about how does humor work, but you can't, in real life, the guy who like tells you a joke and he tells it extra loud so it's a joke, and you don't laugh, and he sort of pokes you and says, it's a joke, get it? Is that funny? No, that's not funny.
Yeah.
So it's almost easier to fake sincerity than it is humor.
Yeah.
So I think well, I won't speak for, I have been told that I'm good at humor and successful writing humor. I'll take people's word for it, as I'd like to compliment. It's because I find things funny. I do find the world funny. I do find people hilarious. I'm an idiot, and I do such stupid things, and then I do them again. And I look at the people around me, and they're doing such ridiculous things, and I love them. So it's sort of like, that's kind of my worldview, and that's, I think, why I'm able to do it, or why, and I think this is probably true of other funny people. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to talk about myself so much. You write from your authentic self, and I have a funny worldview.
Yeah.
Having said that, there are some rules, like, subtlety works. There's timing. There's when there's when you drop the other shoe. There's a rule of 3. You can look these things up. But the real rule is don't push the humor don't push the humor at the reader. Don't shout on the page. Mm-hmm. And you got to love your characters.
Yeah.
And that's true if you're writing nonfiction about how silly your family is. You got to love them while you're writing it. Or if you're writing fiction and you've got these ridiculous characters making dumb mistakes, you got to like those big dumb goons, man. They're screwing it up, but I love them.
Yeah. Yeah, in fiction, at least, if you don't tend toward humor, but you want to experiment with it, you can invent a humorous character. Or I've seen a couple writers pull this off. They, in otherwise almost wholly serious or dark content, they add a pet, and the whole mood changes.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So last but not least, I love to end by celebrating the work of other writers. So I'd love to just hear off the top of your head some books that recently really rocked your world and why, who you love to send writers toward.
Yeah. I mean, it's a constantly changing rotation of writers. I'd like to send I'm a teacher, so I send my students to, like, you've got to read her because this is what you're working on. You need to see what he's up to. Right now I'm teaching a class of undergraduates, Roxane Gay's memoir, Hunger.
Yeah.
And Roxane's just brilliant and she's brilliant and also like provocative. She does not let you go. She'll call you out, whoever you are. So I just love the bravery of it. It's just raw and honest, and she thinks so sharply, and even the form of it is kind of exciting to me, in an odd way, because she breaks a lot of the rules that I teach.
Yeah.
A lot of it isn't seen. She spends a lot of time thinking out loud with the reader about the situation. And I'm always telling my readers, get that stuff out of there and just let the scene do the talking. And because she has such an interesting mind and her pen is so agile, she pulls it off. A book that I think just came out last week or the week before, Be With Me Always, by Rand and Billings Noble. It's an essay collection.
Okay.
Rand and Billings Noble, Be With Me Always. It's about haunting and hauntedness, which all memoirs are, but she sort of takes that idea of haunting and hauntedness, the things and the people who haunt her, and then builds a collection around it. And she writes well. I think what probably captured me about it is, and I like this, I was surprised. I've read a lot. It's kind of my job to read. And when I run across a book that's like, oh, I didn't expect the author to go there. Oh, that's really a cool place to go that I wasn't expecting, bringing in this person or that person.
Yeah.
So that was another one I talk about.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'll make sure to write those out too and spread the word and look them up. Well, Hunger we read, actually many of my students last year, and we read it.
It's a book that's done a lot of people in the world.
Well, there was a lot of love-hate response to it too, because of exactly what you described. It's like,
exactly, yeah.
But wait. So provocative is definitely the right word for that one. Well, Dinty, it's been so wonderful to speak with you. And we'll spread the word far and wide about what you've shared with us here.
Thank you.
And enjoy AWP, or those of you watching this after AWP, enjoy your recovery from AWP. May you rest well and read all the books that you brought home with you well. And just keep us posted, Dinty. A lot of us are eager and ready to hear about whatever you do next. So
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again.